Call this meeting to order. This is the Planning Commission special meeting. It is December the 18th, 4 p.m. Our first order of business is invocation. Sir, if you would, please.
Yes, sir. Pray with me if you will. Heavenly Father, we ask that you please watch over this committee and the planning staff and guide us to wise and safety-conscious decisions and support the public. We also ask that you watch over the county law enforcement, first responders, and other county workers as they perform their duties, that they may return home safely to their families after every shift. We ask that you please watch over the county and state leaders as they work to make the county and state a better place to live each day. And we also extend a special prayer for Deputy Watson and his family. In his name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Y'all have read the minutes of our December 4 meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve?
I make so motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any corrections? If none, all those in favor? Commission member comments. Does anyone have anything to say? Okay, I will say. First of all, I'd like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas coming up. It has been real fun this year. So, just keep up the good work and consider this county and everything you do in this planning commission. And I hope y'all have a great Christmas. If there's nothing further, staff.
Yeah, just give you guys a brief update. After our last meeting, did contact OEA to get the information they had on agricultural use for those farms and farmland. That came directly from one of the previous agricultural censuses, and have contacted the USDA to try and see if they would give us the information from the upcoming census that's out right now, that's supposed to be published in February. That information is all legally protected. It is unable to be FOIA'd. It is unable to be released, so they will not give us any of that information. So we're looking for additional alternative sources to try and identify all those working farms.
I'd like to thank the staff for their work on that.
Yes.
Oh, and Merry Christmas from the county administrator and staff and everybody else. So that's on the table for you as well. Absolutely.
Back at him.
Okay. I will open the floor for discussion regarding subdivision density, subdivision size, and subdivision location. The floor is now open. Do we have any, we don't have any public comment, correct? Okay. So the floor is open at this time, so someone please start.
Okay, I'll start. If I may,
Go ahead.
Chairman. So I've talked to a few people that know the history of Oconee County much better than me. One of them being sitting there in the audience. And he spoke of old ordinances where zoning was a separate ordinance than the development standards. The old development standards were actually applicable to everything in the county. And the old development standards had criteria for lot size, for greenery, and it applied to everything in the county. And at some point, I think during development of maybe the lake overlay and development of the zoning standards that we have now, we scrapped the old development standards for the new ones that we have now that are tied to the zoning criteria. And when we did that, we scrapped all the requirements for any, other than what we have in the zoning, the requirements for lot size and greenery in uncontrolled properties. So we actually regressed in a way. We gave people, and it wasn't zoning, it was just,
Regs.
it was regs for development standards. So I think we ought to think about maybe how to go back to that. That would be a rewrite, though, of section 32 and section 38. If we did that, we'd have to split those apart.
Where are those documents now?
The old documents, we would have to get staff to maybe do some research to dig those up, but if that's something people are interested in,
Is that possible?
Anything's possible.
Can I- Frankie?
Go ahead.
To your point about, my understanding about what the county used to do, so, for instance, this large development that's gonna happen on 130 to 770 acres. Back in 2010, when the Kiwi River Preservation Group got into my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, got into an agreement with the county to develop that, they either developed or engaged in this ordinance, and it's an ordinance still on the books, Chapter 6, Article 4, and it's the Development Agreement Regulations, and it's off the South Carolina Land Use Act. And it kicks in when there's 25 acres more of highland. And it's, the regs seem broad, they're not super specific, but it's better than nothing on A, such a large piece of property, and B, when there's so much highlands in that property. Specifically, I'm thinking of that one and the one next to it, the 660, that's probably coming down the pike. And when I was reading it, I put this quote down, it says, when a developer desires to enter into a proposed agreement with the county, and I thought if we could just change one word in that and just say a developer must, or when a developer enters into a proposed agreement with the county, these land regs kick in, because part of it's even focused on a stormwater act. We don't have anything with stormwater regs that's gonna protect runoff from all those highlands, and so it's bare bones, but it's something that protects, that the developer engages with the county. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about, James? What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that's a decent idea? I mean, it's an ordinance on the book, it's kind of easy to work with.
So I think that development agreement has expired, and I don't know what the legal status of it is, so I couldn't.
Right, you can make it expire in 10 years, but I'm saying it could re-up, or we could make it more of a requirement maybe for the next big plot that's coming.
Yeah, so I don't know whether or not that'll happen. It will take council to enact that, and I
Yeah,
don't know
it
what
would.
the legal status of the one that expired is.
Everything depends on council.
Well, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
when we came up with this last meeting and we voted on what we're gonna talk about, I had in my mind that we were gonna try to break this down a little bit so we could give some time to each area. So we had density, size, and location. And I thought there might be specific things that the commissioners might have on their mind related to each one of those items. So I'm just putting it out there. That's what I was kind of thinking.
Well, I have all these development standards here. That's it. This here is the, the matrix and all. But, we don't have anything. I've read through these and I can build a subdivision on my 5 acres. The county says, okay, there it is. I can build a house on every 1/8 of an acre and the heck with my neighbors. But we just need to come up with some kind of standard that's, we're not wanting to tell people what they can and can't do with their property. We're wanting to have developers develop property the right way without putting a burden on our county as it is now. Our roads, just like you were talking about the big one there on 130. I'd like to know where they're gonna go if they sail. Now, if it all sails, which I don't know that it is, but if it all, they build houses on everything. Duke Power has a little bad spot. How many of them's gonna die? Because they got nowhere to go. They're in that zone where if Duke Power has a disaster, they're gone. There's no way they can get out of there on a 2-lane highway. That highway can't be widened. It goes across dams, goes across the lake. I mean, we gotta have some rules to say, build your subdivision, but do it in an area that is safe for everyone in that subdivision, for number one. I mean, right now, this book is all the rules we have, and it basically don't say anything. It just says, you know, do this, do that, but it don't do anything strong. I mean, you can take an acre of land and put 8 houses on it. And we don't have, our sewer system in this county is not equipped to handle these huge subdivisions. My personal opinion, but I mean, I like the idea of going back to the old development standards. We just need some development standards and tell the guys, hey, you can build it, but these are the way you're gonna do it. You're gonna have to build, maybe it's a half-acre lot, maybe it's a 1/3 acre lot, that we allow them to put all these homes in. Instead of this 1/8, and I saw one the other day that was, I think it was actually smaller than 1/8 of an acre. It was just barely big enough to put a mobile home on, but they was gonna build a house there. Every other place in this state, in this country, has development standards. Just about every one of them. They're not slowing down on their building. Greenville has them. Look what Greenville has. They've got development standards. They've got a whole lot more than that. They probably got 3 or 4 of these books. But yet, people are still building. It's not gonna hurt the building industry to give them some rules to go by, instead of just letting them, I mean, turn them loose like you do. Would you wanna turn your kids loose and say, hey, go do what you want to? No, you wanna give them rules and regulations that say, this is what you do in my home. Well, this county is my home. So I think we need to give these kids some rules and regulations to say, build your subdivision, but this is how you have to go about it. You can't just go in there and do whatever you want to. That's my opinion. I will get off my chair now.
Well, I'm curious, when you think about what you just said, and then you think about density, are you thinking about somehow restricting the amount of density?
I think that subdivisions, my opinion, because I've lived in Charleston, and believe me, they may have rules down there, but they don't abide by all of them. I think we need something that deals with density. I think we need to, build your subdivision, but do it responsibly, and if you've got, say, 70 acres, put a house on every half acre. If you have sewer available, maybe you can go down to 1/3 of an acre. But if you're gonna do a septic tank, you just about have to have a half acre of land to put your septic tank, drain lines and everything, and the size homes that they're building now, it just about takes a half acre of land to do that.
So are you thinking about trying to zone some areas so that we don't have control free, so we can restrict the density? Is that what you're leading?
We can restrict, density can be restricted or can be managed in zone free. I mean, they've got all this other crap in zone free. You got height restrictions, you got, light restrictions, everything else is in control free. It's not control free. That's
I don't know if
a
that.
very
I
bad
don't know if
name
that's
for that
true.
area.
I would like to know if that's true, because when I look at control free, it says this chapter will not in any way restrict control free. So when you start looking at the other,
They have light restrictions in control-free areas. They have height restrictions in control-free area. You still have a 20-foot setback in the front, 10 on each side and 5 in the back, or maybe it's 5 on each side and 10 in the back, wherever, how that, you still have those restrictions. You still have, I mean, there is
Well,
restrictions.
Just for conversation's sake, back to the idea of density, what would you change, you know, to make it where it's what you want? You know, to try to restrict this out-of-control building.
It's not necessarily what I want, it's what this county needs. We don't have a density. If you'll look on, even the PDD, Planned Development District, they have no density. NA.
Frankie?
Well, on that
I mean, we-
38-10.2, on what James sent us, and it says control-free district. It says control-free district is intended to be the initial zoning district for all parcels within the jurisdiction at the time of initial adoption of zoning in Oconee County only. Any parcel subsequently rezoned to any other district shall not be a part of the control-free district at any future date. I thought it went on to say that this is not, maybe that's under the first chapter of the ordinance.
But you look at control-free district, right here, max density, NA. Goes NA. And then you got your 25, front setback, 5 on each side, 10 in the back. Structural height can't be over 65 feet. So if I want to build a 70-foot home, I can't even do it in control-free.
Well,
Because it's not control-free then.
if we get to the specifics about what we want to do with density, that's what I was hoping to have a discussion on, is what are other people thinking about density? Are there some
Can I-
big changes?
Yeah, so, you're concerned about density, and back to Mr. Nix's comment for the last couple of weeks about a trigger. And then I was thinking about the ag map that came out, where 99% of the county is ag exempt. If under the on the zoning matrix that we have, under the agricultural district, it's the second column. Go all the way back to the back sheet, and then we'll work, go to this page right here. And it's there. And then it says, single-family subdivisions, 10 units or less are allowed in the ag district with special exception. Single-family subdivisions more than 10 units are not permitted. So if you could somehow get all those all the ag exempt people into this ag zone, it automatically will curb your density. You won't have much building on there.
You can't get the ag people in the ag zone.
Right,
So
that's the problem. That's what I was thinking, a trigger. Yeah.
Chairman?
Go ahead.
All right, so has everybody got a copy of Chapter 32 in front of them or available? We really need to look at the regulations and discuss how they work so we can decide how we want to change them.
To answer your question, I don't.
If you go to your phone, you can look them up.
Yeah, I've looked at them before, and.
Yeah, go to Chapter
I
32,
gave my hard copies to Ms. Spicer last time.
Section 32, Article 6, Land Development and Subdivision Regulations. This is right now, this right here, Article 6, Land Development and Subdivision Regulations of Section 32 is our development standards. Okay? So if you go to Section 32-214, item Delta, and actually item Charlie, you'll see lot size, it says, shall be determined by the underlying zoning district located in Chapter 38. So whatever your property is zoned is how you determine the setbacks and everything. So in the case of control-free, that's That's what's gonna tell you what the requirements are. Same for building lines, section 3810.2 for all setback requirements in the control-free district of the county. So that's what currently ties our chapter 32, our development standards to the zoning. So if we broke that tie and rewrote the development standards to apply to everything, then you wouldn't have to worry about the zoning part, that you would have minimum standards for development. And then if there's a higher, if there is a zoning, you could say, if there's a higher level of zoning already on this property, then chapter 38 would apply as far as the setbacks. I mean, you can write it however you want it. Depends on how the public wants it. But what I'm trying to do is tell you, this is how it works now. We do have a development standard. It is very lax, which is the way the developers like it. The question, and it also allows for affordable housing to be easily developed. The question is, what's the county willing to do? We can have the lawyer go rewrite this and make it more like Greenville County or somebody else, Anderson County.
Pickens County.
Well, Pickens County is very different from ours in that right now, what they're trying to do is something similar to what we have already, except they're creating huger zones than we are. They're creating
They have only
districts.
They only have 5 or 6 zones.
Right, and they're heritage,
They
like
don't
the,
have anything that's called control-free.
right, they have agricultural heritage, mountain heritage, rural heritage, corridor,
Industrial.
something like that. I don't know that our county has the will to do that, because that is a significant change from what we have now.
Well, based on what you're saying, in my mind, and I'm not saying this is a good idea, I'm just saying it's something that needs to be discussed, is do we just look at control-free and start putting some regulations on it to where,
Well, we had them in the past. That's what, our developers told
is
us
that
that.
the course, is that the strategy? Is to change control-free?
It's not
No, it's not.
not necessarily control-free as a whole, not just it by itself.
Control-free does not mean you have no rules. It's like you said, control-free does not mean you have no rules. It never has. There's rules now that apply to control-free, but they're not part of zoning. They're part of our ordinances. There's things you can't do in a control-free property right now.
Such as,
Can't build a 20-story building.
right, but you can't do that anywhere in the county. Control free is pretty lax. You can pretty much do what you want.
Oh.
Pretty
No, you
much
can't.
minus 3 things.
You cannot
The
build a
height
20-story
and the
building.
setbacks, right? That's it.
The ordinances are what determine what you can't do in a control-free zone.
We're just applying some standards to what we want in the county. We're not making zoning, I like going back and finding out what those rules and regulations were. I think that's the first thing we need to do, is get a,
Can I make a motion?
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that we let Mr. Markovich speak to us on what he told me, if the chairman permits. I'll make that
willing?
motion. Go ahead.
If he's willing, let him.
Well,
This was a workshop.
We should probably second that motion and vote on it.
I'll second it.
All right, we got a motion and a second. All in favor? Opposed?
I thought this was a workshop, that's why. There's no public input. That's all.
Excuse
my
me,
understanding.
I'm gonna say something right now. This is a workshop for us to come up with decisions. If a citizen can help us, whether anyone likes him or not, that citizen's gonna help us. They live in this county, they work in this county, they deal with this county, and we have to get their opinion. If we're not gonna have any citizens talk, then we need to close the doors and lock them and don't let anybody in. So, Mark.
Thank you.
Mr. Nix is exactly right. Prior to trying to interweave zoning and the performance standards, prior to that, all the road development regulations used to be in the performance standards. Those all got moved out and they got put over into the road regulations because they thought, well, it's probably better to set over there. It all used to come under the main performance standards. First of all, think about this. Where did all these performance standards come from in the very get-go, okay? We came up with the comprehensive plan, number one, and all the developers approved of the comprehensive plan. And one of the main reasons for the comprehensive plan was because the airport was wanting to get grant funding to expand the airport. You cannot do that without having zoning to control the height ordinance around that airport. That is state law, that's federal law. You have to have zoning. Now, does it have to be called a particular type of zoning? No, never did. So what the county did was they created what was known as a performance standard. And that performance standard started to take in things on how developers built roads in all the different subdivisions, how big the roads had to be, what the setbacks had to be, and all this stemmed from Pickens County. Why? Because that's where Tom Hendricks came from. Tom Hendricks was the former administrator for Pickens County. And he hated the way developers did roads in Pickens County. He said, we're going to fix this stuff here. And Tom would not relinquish the roads. He was, as long as Tom was here, roads were going to be in the planning department. And that's all there was to it, because he was going to control what was going on there. We didn't have a problem with that. We're fine with that. And so we had all these different performance standards that were all built in. They applied to everything in the county, every piece of property in the county. The height standards, road standards, all the setbacks, all the different, and we did have, at one time, we did have a minimum lot size, and it was 0.57 acres. That did change over time because we started having to figure out how we were going to deal with multifamily dwellings and all this sort of stuff, and how we were going to do apartments and duplexes and all these various other things. And so as that developed, things began to change a little bit. But it was not until zoning came about and everybody decided, that, to be honest, most of the developers, we didn't object to any of the zoning. In fact, we preferred for the lake to be a zone by itself. Nobody wanted to do that. No. So anyway, so they came up with the plan of what they did, which was basically to zone the whole county as control-free, but if you wanted to rezone into particular items, that you could do that. Well, then they came back and decided, well, we can't have different definitions in the subdivision ordinances and different definitions in the zoning ordinances. Although, if you'll read the state law, these are two entirely different sections of law. They are governed by two different hearings processes. Zoning is all controlled by the Board of Zoning Appeals and the County Council. All the subdivision ordinances are heard for and controlled by, you have the same powers as any court when it comes to the subdivisions, but not when it comes to zoning. Okay, if it's a zoning issue, it goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and then it goes to the council. And then if it doesn't get done there, then it goes to the court. When it comes to a subdivision, you all get to rule on it, and if it depends on how it goes, then that developer can go to court. And it's happened. We've done that here several times. And so, but when they decided to try and merge all the definitions that were in the performance standards and the zoning, this was where all the conflict began. And ever since then, so they ended up pulling all these standards that were in the performance standards, applied to every piece of property in the county. They pulled all that out and started breaking it up and put it into various zoning things. So, yes, the performance standards definitely apply to everything in the county. But you do have to be careful how you structure it, because it does apply to every piece of property in the county. And so, you'll have situations that are zoned and so, or other ones that are unzoned. You gotta be very, very careful so that you're not beginning to discriminate against various types of uses. And that's where the lawyers start getting nervous. So, I mean, but everything was in fact in the performance standards. Roads, density, setbacks, everything is there. If you got any questions, ask me.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I was curious if I'd like to make a motion, as long as James agrees, to allow him to speak to the knowledge he has, and whether, he knows better than most of us how all this information comes together. Maybe he could give us some insight as to how things are working now, and give us some, ideas on how we might go about changing things. So that, my motion is to actually let James speak to us just like Tom did.
Second.
Favor? You're up, sir.
Okay, so we get to the stuff I included in your backup on our subdivision checklist sheets. This is what we give to veterans to ask for information about development within the county. Goes through all the requirements they'll have to complete prior to getting their final approval. So, start with a sketch plan. And the sketch plan is just basically a proof of concept for your subdivision. This is where they say, we wanna do these size lots in this area, do you think we can get this to work, essentially? A lot of these requirements are very basic, so it's a scale, it has a north arrow, it's showing what they wanna do with it. It's very general information, proposed uses, it's all proposals. So this is not a formal application at this time, this is not link anybody or give anybody an approval to do anything at this point. Take the information that we give them, they go back, they look at any of that, make any changes they think they need to make, and they'll start getting into their preliminary plans. And this is typically the stuff that takes the longest for folks, so this is where they're gonna need to get all of their state permits. They're gonna start getting detailed concepts together, planning for utilities on these larger subdivisions, and, really waiting a lot. So they're gonna need to get their approval to tie into and build sewer connection, water service, and their stormwater and land disturbance permit from the state. They'll also need to get their DOT encroachment permits from this time, or their county encroachment permits.
What was that last thing? County what?
County encroachment permits, it depends on what kind of road they're accessing off of, who they'll need their encroachment permits from. They will develop, if they're adding new roads, their road plan. And then, once all that's in and approved and we have the permits from all those other agencies, they can start moving dirt on the ground. This can take,
Excuse me, James, not before then?
so, they don't have county approval at that time, but if you have a stormwater land disturbance permit from the state, you can start disturbing land with that permit. Now, if
Because you don't
DOT
even at that point know, the owner may not know whether or not they wanna create a subdivision or development.
They should
may just-
have a pretty good idea, because that's a pretty extensive plan and permit they're gonna have to go through to get.
Oh, okay.
No, that's probably their longest permit of any of the permits they're gonna be required to get, is gonna be that stormwater land disturbance permit from the state. That's
Okay.
typically gonna take somewhere between 45 and 90 days. With that permit, they can start moving dirt, they can start clearing, they can start doing mass grading. Now, it is at their own risk, so if they don't have their DOT encroachment permit, and DOT says that road entrance is gonna need to be about 100 feet further north or east or whatever it's gonna be, they would have to do that work again at their own expense. So that is not a guarantee from any other agency that that plan is ready to go. But you can do that work at your risk. Once all that's done and they start setting pins, they're gonna come back and they're gonna record their final plat. That final plat is basically the end of the subdivision process for them. That's when they can start selling their lots.
You had mentioned the the preliminary access, we passed something sometime back that said that roads and bridges, that they had to go to roads and bridges, and have something done prior to doing this. Is that right?
Conditional approval, so they need that conditional approval.
Is that a check mark down here, a box somewhere?
It hadn't been added, I need to add it to this one, but we go through that as well.
I was looking for it earlier
Yeah.
and thought that we had passed something and couldn't remember, but I didn't see it on this checklist.
That's right.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your
No, you're good.
process.
That's where we are, so if you have any questions, happy.
I wanted to continue the conversation. Going along with the control-free part of it, I'd like to go back, Mr. Nixon made a proposal, and I don't remember, it seems like for some reason, Mr. Root said that it was not feasible that we could do that. But going back to where there was a trigger number of either number of homes or number of acres, that it triggered a process that you then had to follow within one of the zoning categories, if you had over X number of homes. And that didn't get any traction for some reason, and I don't remember why.
I can explain why. Because it was painful when I sat here and listened to the lawyer tell it to me. First of all, he said, that is zoning. It's what you call, what is it when
Spot
some,
zoning?
it's floating zoning? It's called floating zoning, which means something triggers it. It's always out there floating around, and if something triggers it, then it applies.
And that's not legal?
Well, it can be legal. What he said was, my proposal was 30 acres, if it's greater than 30 acres. Now, that doesn't, the other issue I have with that was it doesn't mesh well with the 50 acres we have now for
Right, we have
self-zoning,
to
but
change
we
that.
can work on that. But I proposed 30 acres as a trigger, 30 acres, greater than 30 acres lot size, and greater than 2 houses per acre as the density. And if the proposed subdivision for commercial sales exceeds those numbers, then it triggers zoning into residential, which then tells you have a certain lot size that would reduce the density of the subdivision. So the problem is, there were two things. First of all, he said, the first issue is, how do you differentiate the person that's got 29 and a half acres and the guy that's got 30 acres? How do you differentiate between those two? How can you justify discriminating against one and not the other? That's a legal issue, a discriminatory issue, and you could end up in court litigating it. The county could. That's one issue. The other issue was, if you do in fact invoke those requirements, what could happen is you could discourage the developer from developing in a certain area. I'm trying to figure out, basically what he said was you could create density in areas that you don't want to create density in, and you could push it to different locations. I'm trying to remember what he said
Urban
about that.
sprawl. Urban sprawl, didn't he use that term?
Yeah, urban sprawl type of argument.
Because if it was less than the X acreage, then you could have the higher density based on the control-free
Well, what he said
scenarios.
was, if you have a very high density, you can use less acreage to create it. And if you force people to use more acreage for the same number of houses, then you get more
Urban sprawl.
farm and urban sprawl. You get more farmland to eat up and urban sprawl. So you could actually achieve the opposite of what you were trying to achieve. And plus, then there's the other argument of, well, now you've just made housing less affordable. So there's three issues. There's a legal issue, and the urban sprawl issue, and the affordable housing issue. So I was like, I can't win for losing.
So if we're addressing density and it seems like density was the first one on the list. If we're addressing something like that, it absolutely is going to affect the cost of housing.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
And as Frankie had said, builders will still build. Yes, they will still build. It's just that the cost goes up. Because the density allows for a lower cost. So, what's that?
I said, depending on whether it's more dense or less dense.
Right, the higher the density, the lower the per unit cost compared
That's
to.
not necessarily true.
No, I don't think
The
so.
higher the density, per unit cost is able to go down. How do you say that that is not true?
Because it's on what you're building.
But you can, if you're building the same product on 1/8 of an acre or building the same product on a 2 acre, it's the land underneath that dictates the
Correct.
higher cost.
I agree with
But
that.
it's still density, because you're still building on something
Okay.
other than air.
Anyway, we don't need to argue.
So, I think, I would love to see us try to deal with what David Nix had to offer and suggested. Yes, it's gonna create urban sprawl, but we're gonna get urban sprawl if we don't do anything as it stands. It's gonna come in wherever it's gonna come in, probably on 85, because people are accessing the interstate to get to Atlanta or to Greenville to work, and from the municipalities out, and along Seward. So we're either gonna be saying, we're gonna commit to zoning, which will negatively affect thousands of people, that changes their ability to do what they're gonna do. Or we've got to figure out another mechanism, like what you had originally suggested.
I think there's three possibilities.
And I've got a possibility as
The
well.
first
so go ahead.
possibility is the surgical one, which I suggested, the 30 acres and that floating zoning thing. The second one is do it like Pickens County, which is zoning. And then the third one is go back to the old regulatory structure where you separate zoning from development standards and performance standards.
And then you're on a performance standards issues. So I've got something that may work to that, but let me describe if we go to zoning, and then we put somebody in, all of a sudden, you're now in residential, or you're in this, or you're in that. These are the things that those areas no longer can do that are currently control-free. They can no longer have a dog kennel. They can no longer have a public access areas for, say, a family or a church function. They can no longer store construction materials in their backyard. They can no longer hunt or fish on their property. They can no longer have a warehouse structure. They can no longer provide financial services, can't have a greenhouse, can't have a sawmill, can't have a motor vehicle or small business repair shop in their garage based on a residential zone criteria. So if we talk about saying we're gonna zone something, these people that have 1, 2, 3 acres that enjoy some of these other aspects of what's currently in control-free, we now put an overlay on them that becomes extremely, to a whole lot of people. I mean, a whole lot of people know people that work on chainsaws or lawnmowers in their garage as a business. And we're gonna be affecting them, putting them into a residential district. One thing that we could do, and from a realtor standpoint and a developer standpoint, I'm not gonna say I'm in favor of it. However, if you go to the control-free district and look at it, every other zone under minimum width is at minimum 80 feet in width. And under control-free, it currently doesn't have anything. If we put 80 feet down that list under minimum width, that does start affecting minimum density across the board.
Therein is what I was hoping we could get to, and I appreciate it, Mike. Something that we can take action to change something that might help.
Now, again, you're still increasing cost, you're still affecting personal property rights, you're still doing these things. But if we're comparing something like this to overall zoning, I don't think that it's a question. Again, I'd rather do Dave Nick's area where it only affects people of X amount of density to begin with. But if you did this, it wouldn't affect anybody in control-free to do what they currently do with their property. And it's just for residential use. If they have non-residential use, they can still have all the barns they want, they can still have all the shops, all the gardens, all the whatever that they want. It's just if they're building a house, then their lots would fall under what our current requirements for residential or rural residential or anything else. The minimum width in the build zone is 80 feet.
It's, the only thing I keep thinking about, you said builder builds and all of a sudden you're in a residential district and then you can't do X, Y, Z. Well, maybe the residential district isn't the appropriate zone. It should be traditional rural or something else that fits their needs. But you locking them into residential, put them into, you can't do this, but you could do it somewhere else, but it's still an option.
No, I'm saying we're about to lock them in, not they're locking themselves in. If we zone, we've just told them where they're going. And so unless we're saying everybody is rural residential, which now means even a lower density, we've really screwed people. So we're the ones, if we do zoning, that we're locking them in and telling them they can no longer have a dog kennel.
But not at your, it's not a uniform zone.
It is, it's right there. It's right here.
But you're saying you're gonna take the county and give them all one zone? Is that
No,
what you're saying?
no, not at all. I'm saying that if we zone, we are going to be zoning into one of these 14 categories which have rules. Residential is one of the least restrictive of some of those from a density standpoint. So if we're talking about taking corridors near town and making them, say, residential, rather than agricultural or something like that, then we are taking that guy who, again, has a little shop behind his house on his acre and a half that he stores his excavator for construction, and no longer can he do that because we've put him in the residential district.
So how'd you come up with 80 feet for a width?
80?
Yeah, how'd you come up
If you
with
look at all the other criteria for all of the other zones.
So I see 100 here, I see,
80 is the smallest until
80
you
is
get
the
to
smallest.
commercial.
Smallest width.
Smallest width, until you get to commercial.
Does that go on?
well, here's one for
Well, I mean, it
70.
makes sense to
by the way.
Make it the smallest.
What is
because
70?
that way-
Residential use is 70.
It absolutely affects control-free in no way. What it affects is
Highway
the
commercial.
future developer
Yeah.
has to build
Right
with their
there.
80-foot width. He can still build a quarter-acre lot. He'd be hard-pressed to go below a quarter acre, but if we used to have a .57 on septic, we took it away because DHEC didn't have a minimum requirement as it was. Is that not correct?
That's exactly right.
Okay. So we removed that. This is a quarter acre instead of more than a half an acre, but it still creates an 80-foot width. So, yeah, the neighborhoods might be narrow, but our road standards have gotten screwed up the way it is, so the lots are narrow anyway because of that. But it does allow for a less dense side-to-side type neighborhood. And it does help protect the current control-free because we've not changed anything that they can do. If they want to have a fruit stand out on the road, they can have a fruit stand out on the road because that's a non-residential. And so it has no application to the width of the distance. If they want to build a home for their grandmother on their 100 acres, zero effect. This just says that if you develop that acreage, you got to have lots that are at least 80 feet wide, which kind of goes into what David Nix's scenario was, that when somebody presents a subdivision, we're going to plug them into residential anyway, which is 80 feet wide, which created that less density. So, and I don't know if it's legal or if we can do it or not, but if we put 80 feet in there, that would change the dynamics to some degree.
You're saying just put 80 foot in control-free?
Put 80 foot under minimum width and control-free.
Okay, now, that you mentioned that, Mike, I think maybe we should make a list, and maybe James can help us with this. Make a list of things that we might want to consider, and that being one of them. So that Mr. Root can review it, and then he can say, there's no reason why that's a bad idea. Or you might say, that's a good idea, or that is a bad idea.
Now, again,
Can we, I'd like to make a motion that we make a list of these ideas so that we don't miss an opportunity to check with Mr. Root on them.
Hang 1 second on the motion. You're wanting to put 80 into all three, greater than a half acre, less than to greater than equal to a quarter acre, And what's on the next one? Go up just a little bit, James. And then less than, correct, you want that all to be 80?
If you put 80 down there, it would restrict the most minimum housing size.
Okay, so 80 times 80 is 6,400 square feet. That's 6 times,
So you could
That's
have 100,
1/6
you'd
of
have a
an
lot
acre.
that's 80 feet by 31 feet, 131 feet, for example, is a quarter acre.
yeah.
So, I've got a question, because you're abreast of this. At that 80-foot lot size, the subdivisions that we've dealt with in the last 2 years, how would it have affected those?
A lot of those high, if you look down at, say, the pier, for example, those are on maybe 40-foot wide lots.
Okay.
If you have the setbacks following the same 5-foot setback, you're building a house that you could still build a 60-foot wide house or so, which is, a nice large house. You could build a nice large house. I would think, and I'd have to ask James, you could potentially build a duplex or on something like that space.
So if you put in a minimum lot width, you're not putting in a length as well. So if you wanted to do like Charleston style houses, you can do them, and you can do duplexes or quads in a different way. Your layout might change, you might have side entrance garages, you might do, there's all kinds of things that you can still do and accomplish what you want.
So there's still some creative density options, but aesthetic wise, when you're driving down the road, you are looking at something that is not as intense. And it's gonna, now, again, it makes my mouth dry to even talk about it, but this, as opposed to the
Wouldn't that
alternative.
force them
of
to stack them though?
It could, if we completely say that high density can't happen, I think that that's a bad thing for the county. I also think that it's bad to zone people that are currently enjoying the use of their land. When that overlay of that zone happens, they no longer have the use of that land.
Well, Pickens County's doing just that.
And I
They're
would
proposing just
hate to
that.
live in Pickens County right now for that reason. Again, if I had a little shop out back of my house that I was control free, I'd hate to have to, now all of a sudden I'm zoned. Whereas this doesn't change anything except the new structure being built, the new vertical lift being built. The lot has to have an 80-foot width in that build area.
But instead of going to zoning, why don't we go back to the way it was and just have performance standards and just have it in the ordinance and you don't have to worry about the zoning? You just have a performance standard for the county, period.
The question is undoing. And Tom could probably speak to this better, but when I first started on the planning commission, we were trying to put the matrix together. And they had already been dealing with it for years, trying to get the zoning happening. So if we're talking about undoing the zoning that's already there, I'm not saying that this is not a good idea.
How would you be undoing the zone?
Yeah, I don't think we'd be undoing zoning, we'd just be changing.
Across the board performance standard.
Yeah.
So and I have no problem with any of those ideas as discussion.
All right, we have a motion
Yeah,
on the floor. What, can you repeat it, please?
okay, I move to have staff make a list of ideas identified as worthy of asking Mr. Root to investigate to determine legality.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I don't understand, that seems vague to me, that's a vague motion.
Well, we're gonna determine, it's vague right now because we haven't determined what the ideas are that are worthy. But what I was wanting to do is move so that when we're finished talking about this, that we haven't lost all these ideas. That staff is being asked to make a list, and we can determine later if we want to whether or not we send them to Mr. Root. But I think we ought to at least have a list that we think is worthy at this time of sending to Mr. Root for review. So, for example, Mike's idea could easily be lost if we don't write it down, and it's either in our minutes as part of the list or something. That's why I wanted
It's automatically in our minutes, is it not?
It depends on how detailed they get, is, discussion regarding.
I mean,
I
you've
think we
read-
do need to be making
Okay,
a
let me
list.
make a point. You've read minutes for, what, almost 8 years, or 7 years. There's all kind of stuff that's not mentioned in our minutes, Mr. Chair.
There is. Because they try to make them as short as possible, but yet where everyone
Ideas
understands what
like
we
this one
discussed.
is very easily lost.
I agree. I mean, I think we need to have something written down on all of these suggestions and then go back over them and so.
Let's ask the staff what their thoughts are on that, motion. If that's the way they think we need to go, I'm good with it. I just think it seems vague. I don't know. I hate to give them vague guidance.
We are happy to make a list of the ideas that you come up with. We'll check it twice and give it to Mr. Root. So,
Okay.
you tell us what to put on the list and we'll put it on there. That's fine.
Well, we're not telling you what to put on the list. That's the problem. It's
No,
vague right now.
no, we are.
Each one
Oh,
I mean, I try to explain
I
that.
got you, what
Mr.
you're saying.
Nix.
Yes, sir.
And if we want to, we'll ask Frank to say whatever that idea that's gonna be on the list.
Yes, sir. Okay. I'm good with that.
I'm good with that if we repeat the ideas at the end.
Just need to help staff out, make sure they get good notes.
Make sure we did not forget anything.
Okay, so we've got a motion and a second. We need to take a vote. All those in favor?
It's unanimous.
Someone please keep up with this.
Okay, can we go back
So
for
we
a
have
second?
two ideas so far.
Can we go back for a second?
Two ideas.
Yeah, what you need?
Now, Mike, you're proposing that on the control-free, that we just have a minimum lot size, width, correct?
I hate for that to even be tied to my name. But what I'm saying is that if we're
Anonymously, this was brought
we're
up.
talking about zoning, this is a much more palatable
That sounds like what I
conversation.
said.
Okay, I wasn't tying it to your name. I was just getting the idea,
That's one
okay?
idea.
I didn't put your name next to it.
It is one
80
idea.
for the minimum of the width is what he suggested for control free.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
so there are two ideas that we need the staff to put down. What are those two ideas so they can get ahead of us instead of playing catch up?
All right, so let me see if I can summarize. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong. And Mike just proposed a fourth option. His fourth option was the minimum lot width adjustment to the zoning for control free. So that's item number 4. There was 3 options that we were talking about. The Pickens County option, which is just straight zoning, which I don't particularly care for that. I don't think most of us conservatives do, but it is an option. And we can, we got a good benchmark on that. The second option is the 30-acre minimum lot size for subdivision, commercial subdivision with greater than 2 houses per acre as the trigger for floating zoning into residential, which we had originally proposed, but which the lawyer shot down. And then the third option was separating
I thought it was the old reg structure.
separating the unified performance standards from the zoning requirements and making them and adjusting them for what we want the subdividers to do, more specifics. And that would be a change to section 38, actually section 32, sorry. Article 6.
Would it, or do we go as far as to bring 26 back in, which I wouldn't think we would want to do,
That's the roads,
road
or the,
standards? You see, roads is not only roads right now, it's roads and stormwater and a whole lot of other engineering stuff that goes along with it.
I don't understand that one good enough to, I'll have to study on that one. I don't know if we need to deal with that separately or if that's intertwined with,
I would hope it would be separate, just because we have a whole department that's regulating that.
so why would we need to mess with that?
I wouldn't think we
As
would
far
want
as
to.
if we're
But
just
if we just
addressing
say, let's go back to
density,
the old performance standards, then
well,
That's a part of them.
just the subdivision standards other than roads would be my thought, but I don't know, we may have to get some more words from the wise on that.
Okay, so that's 4.
So let me ask this question, could we, I guess this would be another motion. All right, I'll make the motion if I'm okay with doing that, Chairman. I'd like to make a motion that staff see if they can dig up the old performance standards so we can look at them to benchmark them. That's part of that motion that you guys made.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? And we want that by yesterday?
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind. James, I kind of got the feeling that maybe you weren't able to finish up, and I'm just checking to see, when you had the floor earlier.
No, we're good, so.
Were you finished? Okay. Well, let me ask you this question. I mean, first of all, let me acknowledge, James is a professional. He's been working with us a long, a year and a half?
2 years.
2 years? 2 years, okay. So, the reason I'm asking this is because I think you have insight that other people may not have. Have you got any advice for us on the thing that we're trying to do here?
It's,
Sure don't want to think about it a little bit longer?
sure.
So it's,
Thank you, James.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say something.
So I think another beneficial activity would be to benchmark some other counties to see who has been successful in controlling density. I hate the word control, especially when it's coming from government, but addressing density issues in their county. And what is their regulatory structure? What is their ordinance structure? Is it similar to ours or is it different? Do they have separate subdivision standards, performance standards than the zoning? Or are they intertwined like ours? I mean, I think a look at that for several similar counties, like say Lawrence and similar demographics as us, would be beneficial. And maybe the staff could talk to the other staffs in those counties to see if they have the same issues that we do. I know not every county in South Carolina is experiencing the influx of people that we are, because I know the Midlands, there's nobody coming to the Midlands at this point. Down on the coast, they have an issue, but
They've always had issues down there.
on the coast,
I lived down there 10 years. They always had issues down there of something, like, and now it's even worse.
You have a previous motion on the floor. I don't know if you want to amend the motion that's already got a second, or just rescind it and make a new motion, but we're getting really crossed and
What's the motion on the
Just-
floor?
see?
Repeat.
The previous motion was for staff to find the former performance standard and bring that back to you to review and benchmark and cut and paste what you like.
I recommend that be a separate motion from the benchmarking motion. I apologize for.
No, I was just trying to get it
You're right.
kind of back on
You're right.
where we were before we got too far away.
Okay, if there's not any other discussion on that, all those in favor?
Unanimous?
Yep.
So now I'd like to make a motion that the staff benchmark some other counties.
Tell me more. Are you saying to identify zoning or to identify?
To identify their regulatory, to identify, one, how they address subdivision density, if there is that issue in those counties, and to discuss it with them. And two, what is their regulatory or ordinance structure? Is it similar to ours or is it different? Do they have separate, is their regulatory structure like ours used to be, or is it like ours is now, or somewhat different? And if so, how does it work? And get that information back to us and make a recommendation.
Is that doable?
Yeah, as long as there's not a timeline of delivery.
Okay, are we open
A
for
reasonable
discussion? I don't think it got a second.
Yeah, we got a second from,
Oh, okay.
so it's
Well,
open for
it's
discussion.
open for discussion. Okay, well, I'm against it, and here's the reason why. I think it's not a good thing to have James going out and asking, other counties and stuff, because they're gonna tell him something, and then they might say, well, if you were interested in that, why don't you just go to our chapter 38 and read it? And you don't know that 32 even exists, and James also on a wild goose chase. He might come back with something and say, this is what Pickens County is doing. In actuality, it's not what Pickens County's doing, because he's only got a little bit of information. So I don't see, I've talked with other professionals like James. They say virtually every county is doing their own thing, and they're figuring it out on their own, Now, we look at news articles and stuff like that. I'm not saying don't do that. I'm just saying, don't take all of James and his staff's time to go out and try to find some information that may not be worthy of our review.
Okay, I agree somewhat to that. We're on the planning commission for a reason. We can pick up the phone, and believe me, they will answer any question we have, because I have called several other towns, counties, whatever. They will answer. I mean, yes, James is our secretary per se, but he also is planning director. He also is the only one in that office that's supposed to be able to do all these planning stuff down there. We cannot tie him up 90% of his time doing work for the planning commission and not be able to do the job that he was hired by the county to do. It takes a while to get on the phone. I spent 3 days on the phone looking up, getting information, and still didn't get a whole lot. But they will talk to us for the most part,
Just like the.
just like they will him. If you tell them who you are, I'm a planning commissioner, Oconee County, I've got these questions, can you help me? And they will find somebody, give you numbers, and give you the information. Yes, it may be easier for him, he has a phone number and a fax machine, he can get them to send it to him, but we need to step up, I feel, and do some of the legwork on our own. I mean, James is only one person, and then we got Meanness over there. She helps him a little bit.
So you're saying rather than bird dogging stuff, that we will get to specific questions and then ask him, do we have the legal authority to do this? This is what they're doing, or can you research more into this particular
I
place?
feel that would be the best route to go. Like I said, we can do some work on our own. I mean, that's why they put us on this planning commission, not to give James
I agree with you.
100 things to do.
Absolutely.
We're supposed to be able to do things on our own to a point. And then if we can't do it, then we ask James, say, hey, I couldn't find this out. Can you find it out for me? I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Can I
but-
speak for a minute?
Go ahead.
So it's important for our planning director to have contacts across the state on his equivalents, on his equivalent planning directors. This allows him to make his contacts in industry. We benchmark. It's a very common practice. In industry, we identify best practices and bring them back. I just don't see why that's not something that our planning staff should be doing. But I understand it does use some resources, so.
You gotta understand, we only have one guy technically in our planning department. I mean, if we had a full staff, it would be different.
Mr. Chair.
He's got a staff, I mean, he's got people
I
that
think
work
it's
with him.
due us to ask James if he has time.
So that's what I was saying, so as long as the timetable for delivery is reasonable, I don't mind.
And what would that timetable be?
I think probably the February meeting, especially with the holidays right now.
So that's
Everybody-
Not long.
That's not long at all. I mean, if we're not overburdening him with that task, it would benefit us to have all the information in one place versus multiple people coming in with their own interpretations of what was said.
Okay, just on a personal basis, James is never gonna say no to us. Okay, he is the kind of person that's always gonna say yes. And he might be working 2 or 3 hours overtime to try to pull some of this together. You know, all I'm saying is we're already giving him enough to do. And this is one more thing, and it kind of makes me feel like, don't y'all understand? We can't put all this on James.
Okay, let's get back to what we're actually wanting to do here.
Well, we
Well,
need
you
to
got
vote.
you got to vote, you got that on the floor.
Can we see, can I hear the list of the things that we've already got James tasked with?
Let's take, we've got a motion and a second on the floor.
That we're about to add another task. I was just wanting to find out what tasks we got him tasked with so
Well, yeah.
far.
If James, if you can,
So right now, we're finding the previous performance standard and the list for Mr. Root of the zoning, floating zoning, separating zoning and performance, and then the, adding a width requirement to control grid.
I'd personally like to have him focus on those items before he comes back with what other counties are doing. We may find something, a nugget that we can take out to say, can you find this in other counties, maybe, as a second step?
I agree.
all right, we still have a motion and a second on the floor. We need to go ahead and take a vote one way or the other on that motion.
Could you repeat the motion?
So all those in favor?
Wait, could you repeat the motion?
No, I cannot. James, who?
Motion was to perform a benchmark of other counties
Okay.
and see what kind of ordinance structure they have pertaining to zoning and/or performance standards with respect to subdivision density.
Can we,
Bring back to the table to see what effective ordinance structure they have.
can we postpone that motion until he gets completed with the task at hand?
That's what Mike was suggesting, but if you agree with.
All right, I withdraw my motion.
All right, motion has been withdrawn. You
Yep.
withdraw second, okay. That gives, we can always do that at our next meeting.
I think it needs to be done.
Yeah, but
But I'd like to see these.
James is only so much.
I agree.
Well, I think, unfortunately, it was withdrawn, but if we postpone it till you got those tasks done, then you can go straight into it without having the motion come back up again.
If we postpone it, we would still have to bring it back up and vote on him to do it.
No, the stipulation is postpone it until he completed those tasks.
However, let me say this, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
What Mike suggests makes all the sense in the world. Once we've narrowed down and we are interested in a particular thing, then ask James to look into that for us. I agree, you know, at that time, we could have a motion to do that.
Let's, I mean, if it's up to y'all, we could leave it like it is and let that come up first, after he gets our information and,
I mean, we can, but if he has an opportunity this way, he could jump on it. Is that correct, James?
It's up to y'all, so whatever y'all wanna do.
So that's pretty much giving him the leeway of, if he has the time after he finishes this, to start on it without us having to make another motion.
all right, all we need is a motion to
David, do you read?
restate.
Vote for later.
Vote for Larry. All right.
Okay. All right, anything else?
I need some, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
I need some clarification from Dave. Why the 30 acres is,
That's a great question.
well, the reason why I'm asking is if we look at the majority of the subdivision that's been passed, what acres have they been?
Well, one thing we asked the staff to do when we made that 30-acre proposal was go look at all the applications from this point to this point and to tell us what portion of those would have been impacted. And Jim came back and said several of them, it would be a notable impact on subdivision density in the county if we had proposed or had created that ordinance, if we had put it in place. So we want something that is impactful, but not overly impactful insofar as how far down it reaches. And so 30 acres it was also a compromise as far as the 50 acres that is in place now for
Zoning change.
zoning changes. You have to have 50 acres collectively. Well, I think we learned on that, but my thought was you had to have 50 acres collectively to rezone a group of parcels into a different zoning requirement.
Whatever,
Is that true? I thought it was.
it is 50 acres.
Well,
We
it's
would-
come more complicated than that.
Can-
But
as
we
we
would
found
want to
out.
try to reduce it to make those numbers the same, whatever those numbers would be ultimately.
Right.
And so the short answer is 30 acres made sense.
That's right. It made sense from a impact point of view, and relative to the 50 acres that we already have in place, it's similar.
Do you recall the amount of applications that it would impact?
I do not.
It should be in our minutes.
Yeah, it would be. I don't know if you were here yet, Mickey, when we,
That's what I was trying to get caught up.
Based on the way if I remember correctly, it was a high number of units to low number of units, and acreage amounts. And obviously, the higher acreage had higher units. And so the people that were coming in for a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 home subdivision, they weren't affected by any means. So from a unit standpoint, it affected a majority of total units. But it didn't affect that many, quote, developments.
So-
You know, it was maybe, and I'm guessing.
so Mickey, the criteria again was for the floating zoning into residential to apply. If, let's say you've got a piece of property and it's control-free. So this floating zoning requirement would be if you both meet the condition of it's greater than 30 acres in parcel size, and the housing density in that parcel is going to be greater than 2 houses per acre, and it's going to be for commercial resale. In other words, it's not a guy putting his 30 family members in 30 different houses and keeping the property in the family. So commercial resale, if it meets those criteria, then it meets the floating zoning requirement to be zoned from control-free into residential. And then that's when the residential criteria apply to it.
Which are setbacks and its own density criteria. So then they would be evaluating
So-
the survey based on the residential zoning rather than evaluating the survey based on control free.
Right, so Jim went and looked at, I don't know, a sample of, over a period of time of all the different applications that we had for subdivisions. He came back and told us, here's the ones that were affected. And it was a reasonable percentage. It was all the large ones that were high density. Now, if you had a 30 acre that was 1 house per acre, it didn't apply to that, or a 60 acre with 1 house per acre. There were big subdivisions that it didn't impact, but they were not high density subdivisions. But then that's when the lawyer came back and said, how do you tell the difference between 29 acres and 30 acres? How you gonna fight that in court if somebody says you're discriminating against me? Mr. 30.5 acres,
You could use that same logic with the 50 acres that are required.
sure you could.
Uh,
I don't know that we've been challenged on that, but
All I'm saying is, that's what lawyers say, is anything that might be risky. I mean.
yeah, but we don't define risk as the
Well, all
problem.
I'm saying is, Mr. Root's job is to try to keep the county from getting a situation where they get sued.
Correct. I agree with that.
All right, anything further?
Do we have any further objectives or ideas to put on that list? And I make a
Is there-
We
motion.
ought to.
Do what?
I was gonna ask, is there any way we can, a lot of this, we're talking about restricting, but is there any way we can incentivize subdivisions to move into one area versus the other and designate those areas. I mean, we're the planning commission. Where do we want to see growth? Is that growth acceptable to subdivisions? Where do we want to see high-density growth? Do we have the infrastructure there for that? I mean, that's, so often it's easier to globally do things. It makes the planning a lot easier on us. But truly, where do we want to see the growth? Have we sat down?
Now you're talking Pickens County. That's what they're doing.
Well, he's
Well-
getting into another area, which is location. I just want to say that because we talked about that, and Mike talked about it at length, about near municipalities. And certainly be one of the areas that we prefer there be growth, because they can be annexed in and then they're outside of it.
Well, not necessarily. Even if it's near a municipality, you gotta make sure that the infrastructure.
That was one example.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. We just can't make a very vague statement. We gotta understand what is there in order to enhance the growth. And if we
But what you're
just,
saying is incentivize to, self-zone.
yeah, I think the first thing we gotta know is where do we want growth? Where can we have growth? Where do we want high density growth?
Okay, location.
Yeah, it's, but it's more than just location, we gotta have it there for them, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I would want high density around the, industrial areas.
The only way you get that is zoning.
That's,
Is
It's
that
like
the only
Pickens
way?
County's trying to do, because what happens is if you declare in the outer reaches, like the rural heritage and the mountain heritage, they greatly restrict the density requirements. Whereas near the corridors and near the municipalities, they allow higher density requirements. So if you're a developer and you want to bring in a subdivision, and you want it to be a high-density subdivision, that discourages you from building in the rural areas or in the mountain areas. It makes you build on the corridors, or it makes you build them down near the municipalities.
or near the sewer.
Or near the sewer.
That's the key.
But is
the
that-
sewer.
I guess what I'm proposing, or what I'm talking about, is that any different than the floating zoning that we were discussing earlier?
It is.
It is, it's top-down versus.
The floating zoning does not discriminate. It will not provide incentive. That's the disadvantage that's another disadvantage of my proposal in the first place, was it won't discriminate or incentivize you to build in a particular location relative to the municipalities.
But common sense will tell you that if you're gonna build a subdivision, you're gonna wanna build it towards the municipalities, because that's where your sewer access is, and that's where your infrastructure is. You don't wanna build out in the middle of nowhere.
That's not always
Depends on
true.
what you're building now.
All your good stuff, that's where all your good stuff is.
If you're building a golf resort, you don't want to be in the municipality, you want to be out nowhere. That build it and they will come mentality. So it depends on what you're building.
But you're not building a high density, then that's not a high density. You don't have the high density problem then, if you're building a golf course.
He was using that.
If we're, right, well, I'm using that just as an example. My guess is that there's gonna be just as much potential for development out on the interstate as there is next to Seneca. Because next to Seneca is people that wanna come to Seneca. People out on the interstate are trying to affordably get to Greenville or affordably get to,
And that's where the sewer is.
so,
It's being built now.
Right.
right.
But
So,
there's other places out in the country between Seneca and Westminster that you won't think, oh, the sewer's right here, and it's out in the middle of nowhere. Sewer connection would be available there.
so I guess the point that I was making is that, yes, we can direct zoning into certain criteria, into certain areas, and we will still penalize people for doing so. And then the question is, do we want to do that?
Well, as a planning commission, when you look at location, my view is they're gonna follow the sewer where they can get tap-ins on the sewer and where it's gonna be most affordable. Now, 130 is most likely, it's such a huge investment and there's gonna be a huge gain off what's sold, that they're probably not worried about, sewer tap. I mean, it's just gonna be part of their cost, and they're not worried.
But it is
about
right there.
How many millions? But if you get a smaller place, then you're looking, well, hey, I got an available spot over here between Seneca and Westminster. Sewer's coming right down through here. This is a great place, and it's not as expensive, because the other utilities. So.
I will tell you, we do still have an issue as far as understanding where sewer is and about it, because even there's only one person that you can talk to that can tell you if a line can be tapped or not.
We have 4 things that we're getting investigated, right? I think we need to find the answer to these 4 things first, before we start getting delving into this detail, what-ifs details, and, because I think if we adopt maybe one, then it's gonna focus on how we wanna proceed from there.
Well, with all respect, I mean, these things are tied together. So that's why we were talking about density, size, and location. Because one thing affects another thing. If you're out in a location, you can have high density or low density in some places. It wouldn't necessarily matter as far as a plan for development.
Mr.
Right. That's, I think they all have to be talked about. Location, we got 30 more minutes.
And Mr. Haney had a good point that the incentivized side of thing, we're trying to stop something. There is also, like he just mentioned, there's the ability to, if we are creative enough, to incentivize to go this way. It is a financial thing to do so. Either way, as long as it's incentivizing to do self-zoning as opposed to requiring an area to be zoned. And that comes up, I guess with what Pickens is doing, where you're putting overlays that says you can, and I'm thinking just trying to think here, if you said, okay, the whole county under control free has this 80-foot minimum, yes, it slows things a little bit. Then you turn around and say, but if you will work within these overlay areas, we can give you flexibility on even that requirement, or something. It doesn't affect the person currently living there, but it does allow for somebody to have the discussion of, I really need it higher density than what even the control-free allows for.
That's actually a good idea, because then it only affects their property rights once they decide to build.
To make the change.
Right.
Mhm. It's kind of a hybrid of what Mr. Nixon said.
Well, that's another good idea. We need to state it so that James can write that.
If we, first off, put a little bit more restriction on control-free overall to slow the potential, then identified areas where there would be flexibility to adjust off of even those minimums if there was a need for higher density, which would be the objective of saying this area, this area, this area, we would consider higher density than this minimum thing that control-free currently allows for. Now, currently, based on the 80-foot thing, you still get a quarter-acre lot in there. But the thought being is if you're out in the county, getting something on a quarter acre and getting it DHEC approved is in and of itself going to be a little bit of a challenge, especially with repair areas and things like that. So I think that the 80-foot is going to kind of, and again, I hate even talking about it that it came from me, but that might at least start us somewhere on getting a hold of this. So we've identified several ideas.
So we got five things.
Can you read and so have we already made a motion to ask him to take those 5 things and bring it back to us by a certain window?
So I'll give it to Mr. Root tomorrow.
Okay.
But, yeah, we've got the 5 things on the list so far.
And y'all do understand Mr. Root is leaving us, so
I didn't know that.
When is his last day, and is there somebody else that's been hired?
The job is posted is still up there, so I'm assuming they haven't hired anybody yet. That is an act of council, so the county administrator and the county attorney both work for council. Right now, I believe Mr. Root's last day is gonna be January 5th. And I do not know what the plan is after that.
And it's almost as if this needs to be the next person, but
Yeah.
rather than it just being thrown quickly into something.
Well, we've got a little bit of time.
Well, I think he said he was gonna hang and do some things, you know, until the new guy gets here or something, as long as it didn't take, you know.
I guess my thought is I would love his opinion, and I would love the new person's opinion as well, because it would be the new person who would have to end up ultimately defending our decisions.
Well, let's leave it to James to figure out how to
Let's
manipulate
take the
it.
next steps.
We'll go ahead and send it to the county attorney.
And then at that time, we can schedule another
He can
meeting.
choose to respond or not.
But we get a response, as soon as we get a response, we can schedule another meeting if we need an extra one to talk this over at that time.
Okay, I hope everybody understands why we're asking Mr. Root to do that, is for our efficiency, because if he can knock down one or two of these things, they're not good ideas, they're not gonna float, then we don't need to spend our time on it anymore.
That's right.
All right, is there anything else anyone wants to discuss?
Was there anything else about location that anybody else wanna talk about just in general? Because we are the planning commission. This is a great time for people just to say what they think about location.
Well, I've heard affordable housing being knocked around. When I hear that, I think Utica, because it has all the sewer and utilities hooked in there, it just needs some infill. And then when I hear affordable housing, I think a walkable lifestyle in case some of those folks don't have cars. So you want them more accessible to the downtown areas. I've also heard incentives for developers as fee in lieu of, all that tax stuff, and then that's up to council, yes or no. Sometimes they go for it, sometimes they don't. Currently, I think the thought, last I heard, was we don't need to incentivize developers, they're gonna come anyway. So, those are some of my thoughts.
Anyone else?
I already talked a little bit about sewer, as being the thing that I think is, I think the commission needs to, when we think about our duty as far as planning, I think we need to get more involved in what the sewer plans are. So that we're, like, even our constituents, we become knowledgeable enough to tell them, what's expected. And, right now, I feel like the, was it OJRSA or whatever? They are, about to really launch, on some things. But the other thing is, when you look at what's going on at 130, if you've got 700 acres and then right behind it, another, say, 600 acres, that's gonna be developed. The master plan for the sewer was to build another waste treatment plant down in District 5, near, say, just generally, near Fairplay, or between Fairplay and Townville, somewhere in that general area. So, to me, then does it become, let's keep with this plan for the sewer? Or do we try to get the sewer to do something else? What are they willing to do? What's their capacity? When are they gonna say, we've got enough of this to work with, we can't handle it anymore? I was gonna say a bad word, but y'all wouldn't like that.
Well, I understand the sewer commission is, when they hit the 65%, when they hit the 65% mark, that's when they officially have to start making plans to do something. To increase, changes, build something, whatever. That's like their mark. And from what I understand, they're not even close to that yet. Okay? From what I heard, I talked to quite a few people last week, and I've been hearing a lot of this, is that one of the things they were talking about for that one subdivision was, it's not affordable housing. The one on 130. They're not talking affordable housing there.
Right.
You know,
We're talking about
they're,
retirees.
yeah, they're talking $400,000, $500,000 homes. You know, they might pack them, stack them like they do over, what's it called in Clemson?
Country Walk?
Patrick Square.
Patrick's.
Patrick Square, like that kind of development, you know? As far as like, we already got Sewer South going in, so that takes care of Fair Play and that area, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. Not for long term. That's why the
The
master plan.
sewer south doesn't
That's
pump all
why the
that?
master plan for the sewer is to build another sewage treatment plant. And at that time, what's down in Golden Corner will be cut off after all that investment of that line that goes all the way to Conner Ross. They won't be using it anymore. I mean, I may not be here to see it, but, because things move slow, but that's the master plan. And they're even talking about getting Anderson, and maybe Mr. Nix knows more about this than I do, but there's some possibility of collaborating with Anderson County because of the location. It would behoove us to possibly partner with them on a treatment plant, a waste treatment plant. But I'm just getting this, you know, from the reports because I happen to be interested in it, but, you know, to me, a lot of it has to do with where the sewer is. That's a lot to do with location. Or what happened in this case, like I said before, 130, it's, you know, they might make $800 million off of this. If you got that much profit, you can afford to tie a line all the way down to Conner Ross Creek if you have to.
I think we're getting into a lot of speculation right now.
Well, all I'm saying is that location is predicated on the location of sewer. I mean,
There was a really good map of the sewer.
On non-pressurized sewer. Not the pressurized lines.
And then you got line
tap
size and
into the
things like that
pressurized
that
line.
affects whether something can happen or not as well.
Yeah, it goes back to, it'd be nice for us to know what capacity level they're at on those lines, line size. Be nice to know where the water's at. Be nice to know if these are secondary or primary roads. What is the traffic capacity on those roads? All of these things are key elements in making good decisions moving forward. But, you know, it's, where's that information at?
Did
I mean,
DOT
that was my
weigh in
point.
on
We
130?
should be
Not yet.
collaborating.
Well, the sewer guy told me that's national security, and he can't release that.
Are you kidding?
No,
I think you're kidding.
no, I'm not.
What's national security?
He cannot, I asked him for an overlay, like a map of the overlay of the sewers. He said that's national security, and he cannot release that.
We've got maps of the sewer that we.
No, he like updated. That was from that.
I can tell you sewer is held very close to the chest as far as the cards are concerned. I have a property listed 100-plus acres over off 123 that has a sewer line running right through the back of it. And it took multiple weeks and multiple people to try to find out how big that line was and could we tap into it for development. Because it's very closely held.
That's interesting.
There was only one person that had the information.
Well, all I know is that the newspaper reports on it every so often, and the board meetings are open to the public. For the most part. They might have some executive, but I've been to their meetings, and they talk about what you read in the newspaper. So, and some of this stuff is done. Somebody will call up the director and say, hey, I was thinking about up above Walhalla, I've got such and such. Is that gonna be a good place for me? Well, it looks like it might be, I mean, it's just kind of, it's a target that's moving, you know? Does anybody know about, when you think about location, the other utilities besides sewer? I can tell y'all are tired of talking about this stuff. But I was thinking other utilities, you know, have something to do, especially, you know, potable water.
Some of the stuff like sewer, some of the stuff like roads is gonna be a natural migration. The developers are gonna go somewhere where they can do what they're trying to do. The question is do we just allow them to do that in those areas? Yes, we need to identify where they're gonna be asking us, but they're gonna be the ones asking. Unless we say we're ready to commit to zoning and then we're telling them where they can put it. And I think we disturb too many people by doing that.
Well, I think we have some opportunities for planning based on, you know, people giving us more information. And if you read, we've got the power to ask anything from anybody.
Question would be, will we get the answer?
Well, you know, I would say yes. They're obligated to communicate with us.
Are we ready to end this?
Anything else, guys?
Make a motion to adjourn?
I'll second it.
All those in favor of adjournment?
Aye.